Hello everyone, Loremaster of Sotek here, back with another episode of the Ogre Kingdom's Q&A. Let's not waste any time and just get straight into questions. Our first one today comes from Darko. I can't say that, so we're going to go ahead and just go with Darko. Why did the Sky Titans have cannons just big enough for the ogres to use? I'm talking about the ones that they use like turrets dragged by the rhinos. So Sky Titans used these colossal cannons that the ogres have dubbed to be called iron blasters. And what they use them for is that towards the end of the War in the Sky, which was the ogres fighting against the Sky Titans, the Sky Titans did not really have a lot of technological marvels designed to defend themselves from the ogres, which is a big part of why they ended up losing the war, is that despite their immense size, they didn't have a bunch of really crazy weapons. Now, they did have the ability to, through either technological inventions or perhaps through magic, they did have the ability to unleash like horrific blizzards and like throw explosive bolts of lightning, but they didn't have a lot of reliable weapons that they could use. So near the end, the remaining Sky Titans started working on ways to actually combat the ogres and prevent them from getting to their sky castles in the first place. And so what the Sky Titans did, the remaining ones, is that they invented what we know as the Iron Blasters, which were these huge cannons that were... They're very, very large. You know, like an ogre cannot pick one up. They are so huge that only a giant would even have a hope of picking one up. And even like a regular giant would have to use two hands and it would be very difficult. But Sky Titans used them as garrisons. So what they did was they made a whole bunch of them very quickly, and they lined all of their walls of their sky castles with these cannons. So when the ogre tribes showed up and started to attack, they were able to fire all of these cannon batteries, which would just obliterate tons and tons of ogres every volley. And they had it down to like a scary science of wiping out like hundreds of ogres per volley. However, it still wasn't enough, and they ended up being completely overwhelmed and wiped out eventually. So these bronze machines were... The ogres didn't pay much mind to them during the war. They just did what they could to tear down the castles of the Sky Titans and devour their corpses and loot all of their stuff. But most of what they did was like tearing it down and then just moving on, as opposed to squatting in the remains of the Sky Titans fortifications for very long. So what ended up happening was that about 300 years before the modern age, so not that long ago, one of the tribes members of the Ironskins tribe, which we've talked a lot about the Ironskins, they're a super important tribe in ogre culture, but one of their ogres, basically they had like a contest where they were trying to wipe out the Noblar population around them because the Ironskins do not like Noblars. And one of their guys had the brilliant moment of he had explored the ancient giant lands in his youth. So he basically took some Rhinox with him up into the peaks to the fallen castles, and he strapped up one of the Iron Blaster cannons to a Rhinox and kind of rode it down, nearly killing him in the process. But he brought it back to the tribe, and over the decades, the Ironskin tribe started to get a whole bunch of them because they were like, oh, this is really cool. And then kind of it spread to other ogre tribes, and then a whole bunch of tribes started going up there to salvage the Iron Blaster cannons. But that's why they're so immense, is that they were designed to kill ogres. They were not designed for the ogres to use. The ogres, of course, managed to make like those weird chariots out of them, being the Iron Blaster cannons, because they function very, very well as chariots due to their colossal size and weight. You know, not to mention a big old Rhinox is pulling it, which is like a rhinoceros on steroids. And so, like, if it charges into combat, it is a terrifying weapon to go up against, whether it's shooting you or running you over. All right, next question. The depressed manatee. What cultures have interacted with the ogres, and what variation could we see with their troops based on certain cultures and technologies? For example, would an ogre that fought as a mercenary for the Empire of Dwarves be clad in armor and wielding a cannon, and could a vampiric ogre exist? Theoretically, a vampire ogre can exist, but I cannot imagine a vampire who would be reckless or stupid enough to create one, with the sole exception of Conrad von Karstein. But Conrad turned a halfling into a vampire, but Conrad was completely out of his mind. Conrad was nuts. Generally, it could happen, but I could never see a vampire thinking that's a good idea, because they would really struggle to control a vampiric ogre. But as for your other question, when it comes to Maneaters, they will almost always adapt their fighting style, armor, and clothing to the culture of wherever it is that they're working. And, generally they will copy what they consider to be like the superior fighting style of the place they're hanging out in. So, for example, if you had an ogre Maneater from the Empire, he would probably wear full clothing, and he would probably have like those really puffy sleeves and puffy pants with like all the stripes. He'd probably have like a big gut plate, maybe even a chest piece of armor. More than likely he'd wear some kind of helmet. He'd probably be really big on having the largest mustache that he could, and would probably grow more of like a mustache and goatee style and wax them, because that's what he would see Imperial troops doing, especially the higher end ones. As for like his style, his fighting style would probably revolve either around some kind of large single-handed weapon, like a big sword or a club, and then like a big shield, which would probably be like something ripped off of like a steam tank or something. Or probably the most popular version of like an Empire ogre is, in addition to all that armor and stuff, they have like a big two-handed sword, like a big Zweihander or whatever you call them, the great swords that have like the curves in it. That's a really popular version of a Imperial ogre Maneater. And then beyond that, they would almost always have some kind of pistol, because the guys in the Empire, the engineers, like the master engineers and all of the technical shops in Nuln and stuff, got really good at making ogre-sized pistols, which are more like hand cannons, but ogres treat them like pistols. Yeah, and big hats. Ogres from the Empire are very, very famous for having big hats with colossal feathers. So that's just what you would expect to see there. Whereas, if you were to have an ogre from, say, the Southlands, he would probably cover himself with, like, mud and various plants to have more of a camouflage theme going. You'd have a camo ogre, and they would more than likely utilize poisonous throwing weapons. Poisonous darts. Though when I say darts, they'd be like this big, but they would have like little darts they could throw at you, or maybe some kind of oversized blowpipe used from like a giant bamboo thing. And they might wield like twin colossal axes that are just big ol' hunks of wood with like carnosaur fangs as the axes. So you would see a lot of variance between them depending on where they're from. That being said, I don't know how they're going to do that in Total War. If there's one thing Total War absolutely struggles with, it is having a lot of customization options for units in fantasy. Like, we still have not gotten variations of Black Orcs, despite that kind of being their gimmick. And Maneaters are probably going to be one of the most difficult units to interpret, because the thing that made Maneaters really special in tabletop fantasy was that you could customize them on an individual model basis. So like every Maneater in the unit could have a completely unique rule set. So you might have like one of the models may be like all about shooting attacks, and then another one might be more about like great weapons or all sorts of other stuff. At least I vaguely remember that being the case. I'm actually gonna double check that just in case, because I do like to make sure that I'm not Yes. So yeah. Okay. So every model could have different. Every model in the unit could have a different type of weapon setup, but the overall unit had to share special rules. So you could have a model with a brace of pistols, a model with a great weapon, a model with like a shield or whatever, or iron fist or whatever it was that they would have. But I think on foot they had shields. But the entire unit would have to like have the Vanguard special rule, or the poison attack special rule, or the scout special rule, stuff like that. So I'm really curious how Total War is going to handle it. It would be cool if maybe they kind of went like a hybrid system, or knowing the Total War guys or Creative Assembly, there probably will just be a couple of variants of the Maneater unit. Like maybe one version will be more like Free Company, where they have melee weapons and pistols, and then there might be another version that's all great weapons, and then there might be another version that's like all dual hand weapons or something. I don't know. They'll figure it out, but it'll be interesting to see how they handle it. Hopefully it's good. that's all I have to say on that. And maybe what they'll do for Maneaters in campaign is they'll just have like the scrap system, but it'll be exclusive to Maneaters. So you could say, okay, this unit of Maneaters is going to have poison attacks, or this one's going to have Vanguard, or this one's going to have ambush, or whatever, all that stuff. Hopefully that answers your question. Lucas Guerreros. Can ogres be considered the strongest humanoid species in the Warhammer world? How would they fare in a strength contest versus Black Orc, Saurus, Chaos Warriors? We've already answered the how would they face against like typical people from other races. Answered that 2 or 3 ago. So, but generally they would curb stomp any of those guys. As far as so when you say humanoid, I'm assuming you mean like human in appearance, because ogres are not humanoid in size. They're clearly a size category above that. So in Warhammer, we have 3 sizes of what you would think of as like infantry. You have infantry, which are us-sized. Technically, you can go smaller than that. But you have infantry, which are us-sized. Then you have monstrous infantry, which are ogres. So that's like the 10-foot tall ballpark. And then you would have monsters, which are anything bigger than that. Like notably larger than that. So when you say humanoid, I'm assuming you mean anything that's vaguely human in design or shape. In which case, no, ogres are not even close to being the strongest. The strongest humanoid in Warhammer Fantasy that's still around are the Bone Grinder Giants, which Bone Grinder Giants are huge. They're like twice the size of a regular giant. Because they are much closer bloodline-wise to the Sky Titans. They're the descendants of the Sky Titans that are not nearly as inbred. And all the Bone Grinder Giants are very old. Like they're centuries and centuries old at minimum. But like ever in Warhammer Fantasy, then the strongest humanoids we know of would be the Sky Titans. The Sky Titans were colossal, and their strength was unmatched by any individual creature in the fantasy universe. Like you would have to... The only thing I could think of that could fight a Sky Titan and is humanoid or vaguely humanoid would have been like one of the old ones or the Gods of Chaos, depending on like how they manifested. But those would be the only things that could go toe-to-toe with a Sky Titan. Nicodem Chamalik and Dragos 1994. Just want to let you guys know I saw your questions, but we already answered those, so we're moving on. Gotzer Drake Zorora Venendi. That's a mouthful. Has a couple questions, so let's tackle these one at a time as per usual. How often would you find ogres outside of the Mountains of Morn? Very often if you're unlucky, but it depends on where you live. If there's a lot of violence, like a lot of wars and battles on a regular basis around your home, or you have tons of money, or you live on like an extremely popular trade route, either because you live in like a really populated city, or maybe there's just a major road that passes by your home that connects 2 different nations or 2 different cities, or it's like the only pass between that area, you're probably gonna see a lot of ogres. Those are the circumstances where you would be more than likely to bump into them, because as wandering mercenaries, they're going to be drawn to those kind of environments or pass through those type of environments. So you would be very, very likely to bump into a few over your lifetime. If you lived like out in the boonies, like you lived out in the forests of the Empire, or in the fields of Bretonia, like you were very rural, you could easily go your entire life. You could easily go generations without ever seeing one. Second question. Why can humans kinda coexist with some ogres? Aren't they dangerous and can eat you at any moment? Ultimately, that comes down to that ogres will always choose the path of least resistance. They are smart enough to much prefer having a reliable source of constant food and gold that keeps them content over a much longer period of time than they are into attacking people randomly and being labeled as wild monsters. That being said, the reason that the ogre kingdoms are dangerous as a concept, but individual ogres tend not to be, is because the more ogres you have, the less likely that's going to be the case. Just because people can't afford to hire like entire tribes. And they're also more likely to feel confident in their ability to be bullies. But like individual ogres, probably not going to hurt you unless they're like starving or you're attacking them or like you've done something to make them angry. But like most individual ogres are just kind of happy to do whatever. Like they're just going to hang out and do what they're paid to do. They're not there to antagonize you or attack you or eat you. You know, they will eat you if they have to fight you because their boss tells them to, or you're doing something that they're very explicitly supposed to, you know, like they're protecting a baggage train or they're like a executioner or something. But generally, ogres don't want to mess with you. They would rather be left alone and they would rather leave you alone if they're on an individual basis. That's why there can be plenty of ogres in the nations of men, and men get along with them just fine, or halflings get along with them just fine, because as long as they're taken care of, they'll take care of you. They're not there to just terrorize you. Now, when there is a tribe involved, that's a totally different story. If an ogre tribe comes wandering into the area you live, you need to call for help or get the hell out of Dodge. Because the problem with an ogre tribe is they know they're strong and they know they're scary. So they're going to start to bully people. And what that means is they're going to show up to your village and they're going to say, okay, we're living here now. Like, we're going to squat here for a while. So you guys are going to pay us X amount, or you're going to like slaughter your animals and bring us X amount of meat every week. And if you ever don't fulfill what I just told you to do, I'm going to come to your village and eat people. I'm going to kill and eat you to show you who's boss. But I'm only going to eat some of you. That way the rest of you can like get back to doing what I tell you to do. So when that happens, then you've got something to worry about. But you'll usually see that coming because there will be like a bunch of them. And at that point, your best option is to, if you live in the Empire, your best option at that point is to either like notify your nearest authority figure so they can call on like the garrison or send for the elector count or send for like a knightly order. Knightly orders love going after ogres. Like for them, that's a challenge and they will totally do it. But hopefully you never have to deal with that. Next question. How vulnerable are ogres to mutation? Not very. If they're exposed to it if they're exposed to a corruptive force or over a very long period of time, or it's an extremely powerful source of corruption, such as a giant hunk of warpstone or magic from the lore of Tzeentch, then absolutely they can be mutated very quickly. But most of the time it takes a while. And we talked about that very in depth yesterday. And then we've already answered all the rest of your questions. Non-related ogre question. Do magma trolls exist in the Chaos Dwarf roster? Not that I'm aware of. Seeing as the only thing that can reliably kill a troll is very, very hot stuff, I don't think magma trolls exist in Warhammer Fantasy, because I don't think trolls could adapt to live in a very hot environment. Not without compromising their regeneration system. Like the bodily functions they have that allow them to regenerate. Fire and very hot stuff is like the only genuine threat to trolls. So I don't think those exist. I would not say it's impossible they exist. I'm sure somewhere maybe there's trolls that have managed to adapt. But if they had, they'd probably be pretty terrible at regenerating, if at all. So, but to my knowledge, the Chaos Dwarves do not have trolls of any kind in their roster. I actually don't think I could see Chaos Dwarves using trolls, just because trolls tend to be very hard to control due to being colossally stupid creatures. They're very inefficient, and Chaos Dwarves loathe inefficiency. They have very little patience for it. Bruva Michael, what do the Lizardmen think of the Ogres? The Lizardmen, they recognize the Ogres as part of the Great Plan. Like, they know what Ogres are. They would not seek to wipe them out. However, the Lizardmen also understand, thanks to having known the Old Ones and also having a lot of plaques detailing the subject, that Ogres were very unfinished. They are not what they were meant to be by any means of the imaginary. They came out completely half-baked. So because of that, they are so absurdly greedy and gluttonous that their design is like hysterically flawed. That being said, Lizardmen have a surprising tolerance of ogres and have worked with them in the past. It has happened. There are rumors that the Lizardmen of Lustria and the Southlands have encountered ogres and paid them off to basically do something for them. So it is not outside the realm of possibility or history that there's like been an ogre tribe in the Southlands that have been approached by a delegation of skinks, and the skinks give them like a massive amount of like just golden trinkets, because the Lizardmen don't care about gold, right? It's not inherently valuable to the Lizardmen. The only reason the Lizardmen use gold is because it's weather resistant. And it's like easy for them to work with, but to them it's like it's like how we feel about like concrete. It's like, yeah, whatever. But so there are precedent that skinks would like approach an ogre tribe and say, hey, here's all this gold, and all you have to do to earn this is, you know, see that chaos army that's trying to come in here, or see that group of dark elves, or see that human settlement full of people who have been like attacking us or like trying to come to our temple cities. Go kill all those guys, do whatever you want, burn down all their crap, you can have this. And the ogres are like, all right. they go do their job. So yeah, the Lizardmen don't mind them. I would note that if the Lizardmen ever successfully took over the world, and were full on trying to restore the Great Plan like Mazdamundi was trying to, what they would basically do to the ogres at that point is the Lizardmen would probably end up going over to where the Great Maw is, and would look at that and be like, ugh, that's going to be kind of tricky to solve. So I think what would honestly happen is that the Lizardmen would seek to destroy the Great Maw, which would likely lead to some problems with the ogres as a culture, because the Lizardmen are very specific about how the Great Plan is supposed to work. So on their plaques, they would see something along the lines of, the ogres have a homeland, which is to the east of the ancient giant lands, like just outside Cathay. That is where the ogres are supposed to be. That's where they were designed to be. And the Lizardmen would say, you have to go back. And then the ogres would tell them, but the Great Maw is there. So the Lizardmen would be like, first of all, you're going back whether you like it or not. Second of all, we will kill this Great Maw. And it would probably be like a whole thing. But there you go. Bunch of these other questions we've already answered. Thanks for asking stuff. Alex McGrew already answered those. Thanks so much. Lee Baxter. How powerful is the Great Maw in comparison to other gods in terms of how it affects the planet? Ooh, that's kind of a tough one. So first of all, the Great Maw, when comparing against other gods, is very tricky, because the Great Maw is a physical entity that managed to devour its way through the entire planet and like come out the other side. And so it's just this huge hole, right? And it goes all the way through. It devours from both sides. It's not like one side is the mouth and the other side is where things come out. No, both sides are mouths. Everything is a mouth. So it is, man, I would say that on the fact alone that it is a physical entity that exists and it's that big, like we're talking, the Great Maw is hands down the largest thing in the fantasy universe. There is no god. There is no, like, the dark. I don't even care about the dark. Like, Khorne, Tzeentch, Slaanesh, and them, if they were to physically manifest on the planet, based on what we've seen of them when they did during the end times, little pieces of them, they are not as big as the Great Maw is. The Great Maw is like a Cthulhu size, like he's an old god size deity, right? This thing is so huge that it literally is the size of the planet because it burrowed all the way through, and it's miles wide. So it is a very, very powerful, scary god. Just because of those facts alone. Like there is no thing in Warhammer Fantasy that is bigger than it. There is nothing larger than a planet in Warhammer Fantasy. It doesn't exist. So like not even the dark gods are not larger than the planet when they decide to physically manifest. They are very big and they would be terrifyingly huge, but they're not that big, you know. So I would say that the tricky thing about the Great Maw is while it is immense and it is clearly very powerful because it has the ability to bestow terrifying amounts of might onto those who channel its power. You can just look at when I've talked about Scrag the Slaughterer, who is the prophet of the Great Maw. Like he just goes in like freaking fruit ninjing everybody he runs into and throwing them in his maw pot, and the power he can wield when he gets going is genuinely shocking. He is one of the scariest characters in Warhammer Fantasy once he gets his steamroll going. So I would say the Great Maw is really up there. Like for not being a chaos god, it is one of the strongest gods in the setting. However, on top of that, though, it is worth noting that the Great Maw is not really a global threat. It is not one of the most dangerous gods. It's probably one of the least dangerous gods because it has no ambition. The Great Maw has no brain. It is literally a colossal stomach from end to end that's just constantly eating or throwing up stuff at all times. So it doesn't try to do anything. It's not like it's expanding or anything. It's literally just there and just kind of content to exist. So it is so insanely stupid that you can really just afford to ignore it and just never pay attention to it. So because of that, I would say like in terms of power level, it's probably in the top 5, top 3 gods in Warhammer Fantasy. In terms of threat level, it's like at the absolute bottom of the list because it just does not care. It is like literally on par with gods who are dead, as in like not active, because it just doesn't care. It's too busy like just trying to eat stuff that gets too close to it. And then your second question, how powerful is gut magic, or the lore of gastromancy, also known as the lore of the Great Maw, compared to the other schools of magic? So gut magic is an exceptionally gifted form of magic, as it is, I would say that the lore of the Great Maw is the most powerful lore of magic when it comes to manipulating the physical bodies of allies and enemies alike. So it is unmatched, unrivaled in its ability to for a wizard casting it to specifically cause certain physical effects on the target, whether they're casting like the tooth cracker spell to make their guys skin like a lot harder and impenetrable, or whether they're using I think it's called brain gobbler to like cause the enemy's minds to like freak out and give them crazy visions that make them panic and like run around like chickens with their heads cut off. However, the lore of gut magic, or the Great Maw, really lacks the displays of just raw power and death dealing that the likes of death or dark magic have. And at the same time, it's such a crude form of magic that it lacks the careful finesse of the likes of high magic or light magic. So as far as like how it compares to other lores, it's a very simplistic form of magic that is exceedingly good at what it's trying to do, which is augment or debuff people based on who it's targeting. whether it's like physically debilitating enemies or augmenting allies. It's really, really good at that. However, it's a very blunt instrument. You know, that what it seeks to be good at, it's good at, but that's all it's good at. So I would say it's actually quite similar in terms to the lore of the Big Wa, which is the lore that orcs use. It's very, very similar in power level to it, as far as like how easy it is to wield. So like how powerful the wizards can be, because funny enough, if the lore of the Great Maw is wielded by a Slaughtermaster who has like a cauldron to work with, or a Slaughtermaster who just has like a lot of ingredients on his body, like, because Slaughtermasters tend to have like a lot of hooks in their skin that they hang things from, and they also, you know, will work with whoever they're chopping up at the time. If a Slaughtermaster or a Butcher has a lot of ingredients to perform the appropriate spells, so like, you know, to cast Brain Gobbler, they eat the brains of something, or to cast like what's another? I'm trying to think of any of the other spells. Like Tooth Cracker, they would like eat, like snap a bone or something. But essentially, if they have the proper ingredients and enough of them, the reason I say the lore of the Great Maw is very similar to the lore of the Big Wa is that I classified it as a steamrolling lore. So the more you cast from it, the more you can cast from it. It starts to like, you know, like it just kind of keeps going and going and going. So because of that, it can become one of the most terrifying lores if there is no one to stop it. Like if you just let it keep going, it can get to pretty scary levels, much like the lore of the Big Wa or the lore of Death. You know, the lore of Death is also a lore that the more you cast it, the more powerful it becomes, or the easier it is to cast. Or like the lore of Fire, the more you hit a single target with the lore of Fire in the traditional stories, the more dangerous it becomes. That being said, the biggest inhibitor of the lore of the Great Maw is you have to be very tenacious in order to wield it. The only way to use it effectively is you have to be constantly eating. So if you do not have a bottomless gut, you are probably going to have a bad time, because you literally need to be devouring something with almost every single spell. So if you're not constantly engorging something, then you're going to have a bad time. And it is a lore that you do not have to miscast for it to harm you. Because whenever you cast a spell from the lore of the Great Maw, you are literally drawing the attention of the Great Maw and manipulating it to, you're causing it to manifest in a certain way. But that means that the Great Maw is constantly trying to feast upon the caster. So whenever you cast a spell from the lore of the Great Maw, there's a very high likelihood that the Great Maw will just eat a chunk of your soul. Like it's just going to take a big old freaking bite out of you, and you're going to hurt. However, the lore of the Great Maw, wielded by butchers and slaughtermasters, is also can get so copiously powerful that they can like borderline heal themselves, or literally heal themselves every time they cast, by just like unleashing that power to bulk themselves up. It's a weird lore. It's very weird. But I would say comparatively to other skulls, it's kind of in the middle, upper middle. It's certainly not the most deadly of lores by any stretch of the imagination, but it is a very powerful lore due to its toolkit, if that makes sense. All right, last question today is going to be from Patrick Cox. And he asks, how do I think Total War Warhammer will handle the ogres? As far as the anti-large question. All right, so I do have an answer for this. I'm hoping that the ogres are going to be heavily introduced with a anti-large system. So the ability to mitigate anti-large. So I think there's a number of ways they could do it. For instance, one example would be their gut plates. Gut plates could perhaps have different levels of tiers. So kind of like how we have, bronze, silver, and gold shields right now that give you missile resistance. So like if you're facing front and someone's shooting at you with small arms missiles, then your shield will mitigate it by, whatever percent. I think what could be cool is if gut plates did the same thing, but for anti-large. So if your gut plate is facing the enemy, so you're fighting them to your front, and they're hitting you with anti-large missiles or melee attacks, then if you are like an Ogre Bull, you would have the lowest tier of gut plate, which maybe would reduce anti-large by 5 or 10. Probably like 5. I can't remember exactly like what the scaling for the antis are. I want to say it's like single digits to upper to like 20. It tends to be the highest. So maybe like Ogre Bulls could reduce it by 5. Iron Guts, which have much nicer and fancier gut plates, might reduce it by 10. And then your characters, like your Tyrants and your Bruisers, could reduce it by 15. You know, but only when they're front-facing. So if you can get your Spearmen or your Demigriff with Halberds into their rears, then you can hit them with anti-large without it being mitigated. So you still have that as an available option to deal with it. So that could be good. However, I would also like to see some things in the Ogre Kingdom's roster that maybe are just flat out immune to it, or reduce it by such ridiculous amounts it takes something significant to harm them, like the Stonehorn. You know, the Stonehorns being those colossal, there's not one in this picture behind me, but Stonehorns have like these really big tusks, and the thing that make the Stonehorns really, or they have horns, not tusks. Stonehorn, obviously. The thing that makes the Stonehorn so famous, though, is that like most of their skin has been petrified because they're like so ancient, and they're basically immune to most forms of damage, and they can't feel pain. So what I could see for like a Stonehorn is like maybe the Stonehorn just ignores anti-large to represent its stone skeleton rule, because in tabletop the Stonehorns literally have a rule called stone skeleton, which made it that if anything with multi-wounds hit a Stonehorn, it would reduce the number of multi-wounds it took by half. So like a cannon could like, if a cannon rolled really well and like just nailed it in the face, it could cause a little bit of damage. But whereas a cannonball could like kill a dragon in a single shot in tabletop normally. So I could totally see that being really cool, and maybe being a way to deal with that. And then the Thunder Tusk. So this guy right here, the Thunder Tusks have like an aura of frost that's supposed to be really spooky and provide like a lot of debuffs to help with the ogres. So maybe like his aura, on top of like maybe slowing speed and stuff, it would be really cool if it just had like a flat out aura that reduced anti-large, to just allow Ogre Kingdoms to have a lot of toolkits that'll help you deal with the anti-large spam that's present in the game. That way, but you know, make it spread out enough that your opponent can also deal with it. So there's strategy involved. You know, it's like, oh, they have a Thunder Tusk, so I know that if the Thunder Tusk is near me, he's going to mitigate anti-large. So if I have anti-large shooting Cav, I either want to focus him really hard so that he dies and they lose that protective aura, or maybe I want to send my anti-large Cav to attack units far away from him. That way I'm not losing that bonus. Or maybe, okay, I'm going to focus my hard-hitting armor-piercing characters and war machines on the Thunder Tusk, so that when it dies, then I can move in my anti-large halberds and infantry like that to take advantage of it being out of the way. So as long as they have a lot of answers, I think they would be fine. Because that's one thing we haven't really seen introduced yet, is the ability to mitigate anti-large and anti-infantry. There's a ton of stuff now that just grants it, which wasn't the case in Game 1. Like, I don't know if y'all remember back in Game 1. In Game 1, anti-infantry and anti-large were like almost sacred stats that you either had it or you just didn't, period, end of story. And then in Game 2, they've really expanded the ability to give it to nearby troops. So now, like, you know, they introduced Aranus Assault Spike, can give, you know, anti-large. Alberic de Bordelot can give anti-large. Scarsnick can give anti-large. And I think there are some things in the game that grant anti-infantry bonuses as well. Like, that's a thing now. So I would love for Game 3 to now bring the reverse in. Give me the ability to counter these effects. Give me the ability where if, oh man, those Demigriffs with halberds are charging my Mournfang Cav, I have a tool that says, nope, you know, to add a level of counterplay and give and take. We have a lot of give, but not a lot of take right now. So anyway, That being said, beyond that, I would really expect to have ogres to have just hysterically large health pools. Ogres, like for the amount of models in a unit, they should have the largest health per model pool by an astronomical amount compared to every other race in the game. You know, obviously certain monsters will be different. You know, you have your Dread Saurians and stuff that have like 10,000 plus HP. But, you know, Stonehorns and Thunder Tusks, they better be in the 10,000 plus category. And then regular ogres, though, need to have a ridiculous amount of health per model. You know, they should not be the kind of model where, oh, I hit an ogre with a bolt thrower or a cannon, and so he died immediately, like you see with Ushopti and stuff. It should be like, I hurt him, but he's getting back up. You know, it should take quite a bit to kill them. That way they can weather, you know, firing lines and stuff when they're coming in for charges. The only other thing I could see of as a potential solution is just having a lot of different Noblars. If they had like a substantial amount of different Noblar types, maybe you could use Noblars to kind of like charge into enemy infantry, and then you have your ogres charge in after that. That way the Noblars are mitigating a lot of the damage being done. But that's not going to protect ogres from shooting or anti-large shooting, which is a thing now, and we have it in copious amounts now. So, I don't know. We'll have to see what they do. Those are some solutions I have on the topic. I think there's plenty of great answers there. Either use some of them, all of them, or something different entirely. But, yeah. I don't think it's an unsolvable problem. I think it's just something that needs to be, you know, figured out. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this Q&A video. I'll see you again tomorrow morning, if not before then, for some other stuff. And I hope you all have a wonderful day. Thanks for watching, guys.